Okay. Yeah. The title of my presentation is The Framework for Publishing in Scholarly Journals. I would like to cover, can I move on to the next slide? Next slide, please. Yeah.
Dr. Vijay?
So the things that I would be covering in this session is I would be talking about how we can do research in stages. Okay. I'd also be touching upon how you can select the right journal for your publication. We'll also talk about a couple of useful tips given by language experts. Okay. We'll also talk about the kind of publications that you can trust. Okay. A reminder about the bogus and fake publications. Okay. How can we get started in academic publication? I would also be talking about the IMRAD format that is followed in social science framework. And I would be talking, I think most of your teachers in the previous day might have spoken about from the writing angle. So I would be talking to you on these points from a publishing angle. I would also touch upon editing at the macro level and micro level. A free software where you can use for checking your own plagiarism of your content. Okay. Finding a cohort or a companion in your writing. We would also talk about the publishing, once you've written your paper, the publication process. And once your paper has been published, we'll speak about how you can promote your work. Can we move on to the next slide, please? No, sir, the slide before this. Yes. So, yes. So, I would always suggest for young scholars, if you're a novice scholars, if you're looking for publication, or if you're looking to do research, you can generally do research in 3 stages. This was a talk that I heard at SSN College of Engineering, where Dr. Raj Reddy, he's a computer scientist. He was talking to the engineers on how they can involve as students, like first year, second year, and third year students, how you can involve yourself in research. And he was also demonstrating to them how you can start actually the research process, where you start doing the experiment. So he's a Turing awardee, and he's also a Padma Bhushan awardee. And I thought we can implement this in ELT and in language. So he speaks about the first stage, where you already read on works written by researchers, and you try to replicate or duplicate the work that has been done. When you move on to the second stage is where you do a modification of an already existing book. Now, when he was speaking to the engineers, he spoke about if there's a product that you have made at the end of a research, if there is already a product available in the market, what you can do is actually make it faster, better, or cheaper. So the second stage is a modification. What you do is, if there's an already existing method, you just do a little bit tweaking of that particular method in the second stage of research. Now, the third stage of research is a stage where you think about something really original, and then you come up with a creative idea and then do the research from scratch. So we're going to deal with each stage in detail. Okay. Now, the first stage of a publication where you're actually finding out the journals that you need for that you need your paper to be published in. For example, if ELTJ of Oxford University Press is your dream publication, you read articles in ELTJ. Now, if there's a specific area that you're interested in, you read articles in that specific area. And then you identify, so reading is the first part of it, okay? You identify one particular article that you think you can do the same study that is advocated by that particular researcher. The first stage of is choosing an article, okay? Then you move on, like once you've taken the article, you do an in-depth reading of that particular article. You go down and there's work cited in that particular article. You go read all the work cited in that article. So generally there would be a lot of researchers who have worked in the similar field. Okay. So at your first stage of research, okay, if you don't have to come up with something original at this particular stage. You're just learning how to do research. Okay, so you can actually take that method and you can implement that method in your classroom or in your research setting. Okay, and then you can the next stage is report your findings. So what you do is what will happen in your research finding is either you confirm with the study that has already been done, or you don't confirm with the study. You have unexpected findings other than what is already stated. Okay. So that's the first stage where you actually replicate the work done by earlier researchers. Can we move on to the next slide? Yeah. So second stage is, as we look at the LT scenario, is, for example, if there is a methodology that has been advocated by a language expert, you can either make a modification to that particular methodology. So the second stage is making a small modification. If the researcher has advocated a particular speaking cycle for his or her research, maybe you can make modifications to that particular speaking cycle. So you just so the stages would be, like, for example, you would the first thing would be choosing the article. Okay, you would be reviewing the literature part of it, like reading all the works from the works cited. Okay, so the third stage is whatever is the existing method, you're making an alteration to that particular method. So there might have a lot of researchers who have actually spoken about this particular method, and there'll be a lot of researchers who have done different things in it. So you can actually, when you talk about, we are still at the second stage, sir. So what you can do is actually, in the second stage, is you can write and review all the work that is done by researchers in their literature review. Now, when you do your research. So generally in the second stage, in the modification stage, what you're doing is you're saying that your method or your thing is better than, so you might have results that would say that your method is better. Okay, so that would be the second stage of research. And the third stage is where you come up with something original. You have a moment of insight, and then you think about something original. The first thing that you have to do is review the literature that is available. You can actually go to Google Scholar and type in the topic, or you can go to individual journals and type in the topic. You can do your research and then report your findings. Okay. Can we move on to the, so I was just talking about the different 3 stages in which you can do your, if you're a beginning researcher, you always start with the reproduction stage. Later on, you move on to the modification stage. And the third part is coming up with something original. Now, so we've finished with coming up with ideas part of it. Okay. Now we are moving on to finding the right journal. Okay. And now this is a wonderful quote that I found by Highland, where he said, the first thing that a researcher has to do is actually research the journal list and find out the journal that is pertaining to his or her field. So it's always not clear to novice researchers that they may have to invest almost as much time and energy into researching the journal in their field as they will have to be writing the paper itself. So researching the journal in your field is the first step. Okay. Now, finding the right journal. You have a lot of indexes available. Okay. Now, an index that has been completely accepted by most of the universities in India and abroad is the Web of Science. Okay. It was earlier owned by Thomson Reuters, and now it has been bought by Clarivate Analytics. Okay. So in Web of Science, you have 5 different indexes. You have Science Citation Index, Science Citation Index Expanded. Earlier you had 5, but now they have actually combined SCI, that Science Citation Index, and Science Citation Index Expanded into one. You don't have a Science Citation Index now, you have just the Expanded. And then you have the Social Science Index and the Arts and Humanities Science Citation Index. And you also have an Emerging Source Citation Index. But in many universities, and especially in the UGC list, the Emerging Source Citation Index is not available. So when you choose your journal, you'll have to be careful about this. Even in Anna University, they have not included any journal from the Emerging Source Citation Index. So whatever journal list that is given to you, but Web of Science, whether it is the Social Science Citation Index or Arts and Humanities Citation Index, that is acceptable in most of the places. Now, another reliable place where you can look for journals are, it's a Scopus index, and if you just have to key in your subject area there. In linguistics, if you just type in language and linguistics, you would get in almost 800 different journals. So whether it's literature or whether it's language and literature, in the subject area, you can actually go through. If I had the thing, I would have shown you the web page. Okay. Similarly, the SJR ranking is also a very authentic ranking where you get to know the impact factor of the journals. So three places where you can look for journals are the Web of Science, Scopus, and the SJR ranking of journals. 3 authentic places. Okay. Now, but what is more important to you is the list given by your university. Now, UGC has a separate list that is given, and Anna University or any university has a separate list given too. So the first thing that a scholar has to do is go and research into that particular journal list that is available to him or her. Okay. Can we move on to the next? Yes. I remember in 2014 reading an article by Renandia where he spoke about choosing journals for novice researchers. And so I just served when I got this invitation to give a talk. I thought I would like to include his paper in, and that's when I came up with that. I saw that he has written an article again in 2020 on understanding academic publication. Okay, giving tips for emerging writers. Okay, so here some of the useful tips that he speaks about is find out the scope of the journal. Read when you want to send in your paper. Okay, read the scope of the journal and see whether your paper fits into that particular scope. And now there might be journals that are completely research focused journals, and there might be journals that are practical oriented, that would publish practical oriented studies. So if you have a practical paper in your hand and you send it to a research focused journal, the first thing that you would get is an immediate rejection from the editor, even before going for peer review, and vice versa also. Like, if you have a research-oriented paper and you send it to a practical-oriented journal, you're not going to get your paper published. Some of us are very lazy. We don't study the author's guidelines. So that's a huge defect in when you think about publishing. So there's author's guidelines given in most of the journals. Read that properly and see whether your study fits into that particular scope. Even there would be a ways in which you can actually submit, ways in which you can actually format your paper. There would be guidelines available, submission guidelines available, and you have to actually read that. Now, we spoke about finding the right journal available in 3 indexes that we were speaking about. Okay. Now, as I said, like not all journals are being accepted by all universities. Okay. And how would you distinguish between the right type of journal and how would you distinguish between fake and bogus journals? Okay, and there are a lot of things that you can keep in mind when you're looking for journal. Always look at the editor's board. Okay. There are a lot of associations available in language and literature. Okay. There are teachers' associations available. Now in India we have FOTEL, we have LTI. Okay. Each association might have a journal that they might be running. Especially you have teacher associations abroad that have, ITFL has a list of associate members and all of them have journal publication. Similarly, all the TESOL organizations have journals that they run. So when you look at an association publication, it will depend upon the editor that the journal can very easily enter into the Scopus and Web of Science index. So an association journal you can always trust on. Okay. Another thing that another kind of publications are university publications, publications that are put forward by universities. Okay, so that's another authentic kind of publication. And the third kind is something that all of you are familiar with. Publications by reputed publishers like Elsevier, Taylor and Francis, and Springer. As researchers, something that all of us should be warned of is predatory publications. You can identify that whether a publication is a fake or a bogus publication. They would offer you easy publication. That's the first thing. And there will be a huge article processing fee. Okay. So that's outright cheating the authors. Okay, and generally first timer now. To publish a particular paper, that it's taken 1 to 2 years for me to get a publication. So the process is not simple. A paper might be published maybe at the end of 2 years. Maybe it's taken 1 year, 6 months, but never less than 6 months. Okay, so somebody's offering you a publication in a day's time or 2 days time, understand there would be no value to that publication. And the best thing is let it go through a review process. When it goes through a review process, the quality of the paper would definitely enhance when it goes through. Now, article processing fee has become a big question mark, because there are now reputed publishers who are publishing only on open access, and they would actually charge a huge fee. So that's article processing fee has become a very what do you say, a very a very difficult thing now, because most of the publications are moving on to open access, and most of the publishers are waiting to get money over there. Okay, so can we move on to that? Now, this is again from the how can you start publishing? This was again from that article written by Renandia and his friends, okay, in 2020. So it's also similar to the article that I read in 2014 from the same author. Okay. So there's a list of advice to emerging writers, like how you can go about the publishing process. Okay. So when you start, okay, I know all of us dream of publishing in ELTJ run by Oxford or TESOL quarterly, but it may not happen in the initial, especially in the initial stage. So aim low. Think of publications which have a lower rejection rate and a higher acceptance rate. Okay. Now, if you're publishing in the field of ELT and language, go for a generalist list rather than a specialized list. Like for studies in second language acquisition would publish only theoretical papers in the field of second language, while a journal like TESOL Quarterly and ELTJ, they would publish a wide range of subjects. So when you choose a journal, at first choose something that is of a generalist nature, and then you can move on to more specialized publications. You can also, and the next thing, the third point that he talks about is about this, as we mentioned earlier, about the scope of the journal. Try to see whether the scope of the journal actually fits into the publication. Yeah, he also talks about, the fourth point that he talks about is predatory journals, avoiding predatory journals, and we just mentioned about that. Another thing about things that you can think about is publishing in special issues. Special issues are important because an easy publication is possible if you look at a special issue. Okay. Another type of journal that you can look forward to is newer journals, where there would be a higher acceptance rate because they're just getting into the publishing industry when you're looking for publications.
Excuse me, the presentation is possible.
Yeah. So another thing. Another thing that you can also try is writing shorter papers. Okay, You can always try writing shorter papers. For example, a proper research theoretical oriented paper would be something that would go on to 7,000 to 8,000 words. Okay. So when you start, you don't have to think about a huge paper like that. You can start with shorter papers. There are publications that would accept articles for 1,000 words. So that you can do that in the beginning. They would accept articles for 2,000 words. And they'll also accept articles for 3,400 words. Okay. So you can think about a shorter paper in the beginning and then move on to the actual theoretical paper. Okay. Now, there are a lot of ethical issues that a scholar should do or should keep in mind when he or she is publishing regarding plagiarism and things like that, the ethics behind publishing. Okay. The ninth tip that they're talking about is try co-authoring with an experienced author. So your research guide is a person that you can rely on, and you can have proper feedback from your research guide. So always try first with co-authoring with. That's what people in the science industry do. So, the 10th one is the most important. Is be ready for rejection. I know it's absolutely painful when you've taken so much effort into writing something and then and when you get a rejection. I know even I get very upset. Like I used to get upset in the beginning, but then I just got used to it. I've even read articles where they talk about researchers or research scholars should be given psychological counseling for actually going through rejection during publication. I think most of you might have gone through this phase. Can we move on to the next slide? Yeah, so I would just talk about my research journeys. My first 3 publications were accidental publications. So I really didn't go through that particular stress, but I did have a dry period of 4 or 5 years where I didn't have publications at all, and things were getting really. So only then I understood that my first 3 publications were actually publications with a higher acceptance rate and a lower rejection rate. So, so when you choose a publication in the beginning, so always choose something with a higher acceptance rate. There are a lot of look for mentor publishing, where the publisher plays a role of the mentor to actually bring out a great work from you. Okay. Yeah. So I started first writing for magazines, and then I moved on to journals. Okay, so you can also think about writing, like you have ELT, ET professional for you. You have modern English teacher magazines. There are a lot of magazines available in ELT. Think about start writing for magazines, and then you can coolly move on to journals and later writing a book and so on. Okay. Can we move on to the next slide? This is something that I have noticed when I have done paper presentations, and I've listened to a lot of paper presentations. You're so much into the methodology, and you're so enamored by the methodology and the research that you have done, that there are so many papers that people completely forget about the literature review part of it. Okay. So the most, I would say, if you're starting to publish, like the most important part is the literature review. Have you surveyed all the literature that is available in your particular field? Okay. Have you explored the gaps in the existing literature? Okay. And do you have a unique research question? When you're talking about a unique research question, like each time when I write a research question, I go back to mine and I just check whether the research question is nice, whether it's a qualitative research question or whether it's a quantitative research question. So as I said, the literature review is the most important part, and some of us actually forget doing that because we are so much engrossed in the method that we are doing. Writers should be aware of the format. So if you just copy and paste this into your plain blank paper, the fear of blank space is not there. You already have the format available for you. So the IMRAD format is very rampant in the social science field and the science for science and engineering. It's the introduction, methods, results, and discussion. And of course, between introduction and methods, that's literature review. And after results and discussions, you have conclusion. So if you have these 10 words, I think if you copy and paste that into your blank sheet, you already have 10 words in your space, and you just have to start working on your paper. So always keep the format in your mind. I would be just talking about each format in a quick manner. First, let's go on to the title. Next slide, please. Okay. Yeah. So the title is your whole paper in one sentence. So make sure that you have all the keywords in the title. You have to be, when you frame your title, you have to be conscious that now publications would take shorter titles than longer titles. So let it be as short as possible. You have to be specific and accurate when you choose your title, because if it has to be identified by later researchers, your title should be impressive enough so that, or should have all the keywords in it so that it would be cited by other researchers. Okay. Can we move on to the next slide? Okay. Authorship is again a place that has a lot of conflict, especially among the research community. Okay, so I'm sure all of you would have a doubt, like, who is the first author? Okay, I would say that the first author is the one who conceives the idea, and also the author who writes the paper. Okay, and the second author is the one who actually mentors the publication. But there are problems when it is conceived by one person and the writing is done by another person. Okay, so that's when we have problems. Okay, so something that you should be aware is guest authorship and ghost authorship. We don't have guest authorship too much in the social sciences because. I'll give you an example of a guest author is, for example, if a pharmaceutical company has actually conducted a research and they have already written down their paper, they've had ghost authors write down that particular paper. What they do is they send mails inviting authors for authorship. So they would look for famous people in that particular field, and they would ask and invite them, ask them whether they would like to be the author of this publication. So they get their research published and sales for their drugs. That's actually, but you're not involved in the research at all. That's guest authorship. Ghost author is also done in the science field where somebody does the research and you hire author to actually write down what has been done. Okay, so that's ghost authorship. So things that you have to avoid. And can we move on to the next slide? Okay. As I said, the title, when you choose your keywords, even when you upload your keywords in different publications and different websites, when they ask for keywords, you have to be very careful when you type in your keywords. Okay, so if you want to get cited, and if your article, if you want to get the attention of other researchers, keywords are very important. There are chances that your research publication would be read if the if you key in the right keywords. Okay, and a probability that it would appear in different search engines also. Can we move on to the next? Yeah. Now, abstract, this is something that all of you should know. Generally, an abstract is written in last, like once you finish writing the whole paper. Even though it appears at the beginning of article, it's written last. So when conferences ask you for an abstract alone, they think that you've already actually written the whole research, you've already done the whole research, you've written down your paper, and you already have your findings. And so they ask for the abstract because they think that you've already written it last. So there's a very bad practice that's going on. We just write the abstract and we send it, and sometimes we never even write the whole paper. So this to just remind you about a bad practice that we all do. Can we move on to the next slide? Yeah. So generally, an introduction, you have 3 paragraphs for an introduction. In the first paragraph, you talk about the context and background of the research. The second is on the reasons for conducting research. And the third one is giving a brief overview of your research. And then you include your research question towards the end of the introduction. You also include, like in the overview, you're including your experimental design or method that you have used. Okay, we move on to the next slide. So an introduction would not go more than 3 paragraphs to 4 paragraphs. Can we move on to the next slide? So when we're talking about the method section, there are a lot of researchers that are quantitative in nature. There are a lot of researchers that are qualitative in nature. So that's a preference of each scholar, right? Whether you like a quantitative research pattern, or whether you like a qualitative, or whether you prefer mixed methods. I generally prefer qualitative patterns because I somehow feel when you do quantitative, you do a pre-test and you post-test. Okay, you somehow kind of manipulate the data to show that your findings are better than your post-test is better than the pre-test. So there's some kind of manipulation in data when you do quantitative data. While when you're doing a qualitative study, I think that it's more authentic than a quantitative. There are personal preferences, but generally, if you want to get published as a writer, it is only a quantitative study that would get you into a very good journal rather than a qualitative study. So it's again, now when we're talking about results, it's when you have to use tables, figures, and graphs. Okay, here you do not do an interpretation of your results. It's only, can we move on to the next slide? It's only in the discussion and, can we move on to the next? Yeah, it's only in the discussion and conclusion stage where you do an interpretation of your results. Some of us really are not things that we are not aware about is we don't answer the research question that has been asked. So this is a place where you have to actually answer your research question according to the findings that you have got. So something that you have to keep in mind is answering the research section in the discussion section. Okay. Can we move on to the next slide? Yeah. This is something that I have found it useful. I have not personally used the speech to text because I don't think so. I'm that lazy. Like I prefer typing. But if there are if you had a very tired day and you don't have time to write, okay, the speech to text option is available for very lazy writers. Like if you don't think that you're a writer kind of person and you're more of a speaking person, just speak and then get it recorded on a page. So instead of a blank page, you at least have something of what you have written. Okay. I generally do the second option, that is text to speech, when I'm very lazy and I don't want to read. I have always made use of the read aloud option in PDF and the speak option in Word. Okay, so and I've always found the speak in Word very useful when you're doing the editing part of it. Okay, so something that I've always done when I'm lazy to read and when I do my editing, I make use of the speak option in Word. Can I move on to the next slide? So language editing is something that all of you should be careful about. When you do language editing, you do it at a macro level, and you can also do it at a micro level where you look at each word by word. Okay. At a macro level, you're looking at whether you've actually conveyed your thought and whether there's clarity in your expression, whether you've organized your points properly. Micro level editing, you go word by word. If there's clutter in your writing, cut all the clutter in that particular writing. Look for your common errors. Look for your sentence, whether they're all complete sentences, whether there are sentence fragments or run-on sentences. So check whether your sentences are correct. Subject-word agreement is something that we should all try to adhere to and check for incorrect and inaccurate. For the language editing part, I always run my paper through the unpaid version of Grammarly. And it's always helped me. I've always seen that there are errors that you've not noticed that come up in the basic version of Grammarly. I've never used the paid version of Grammarly, but I've always used the unpaid version of the basic version of Grammarly. Once you've prepared your paper, you've written down according to the particular format available. Now, before you send it for publication, run it through a plagiarism checker. If you're fortunate enough where your university would provide Turnitin and Urkunt, you can be really lucky where they would give real and authentic reports. I generally use the SEO plagiarism checker. That's a free software, and you don't have to pay money for that. It is completely free. Now, something that you have to look forward to is finding a companion in your writing, someone that you can actually talk and discuss your paper with. So already before sending it for peer review, you're getting it reviewed by your research guide. Okay, you can also think about a friend that you can talk to, where you can talk freely about that particular paper and get proper feedback. But the friend should not be a friend who's an enemy. So be careful of that. Or you might find before your paper getting published, there might be other papers being published. Okay. So once you get the feedback, revise accordingly. Right? So instead of sending it for review and getting a rejection back, revise immediately and whatever advice is given you, like whether it's acceptable to you, if it's acceptable to you, try to revise the paper. Can we move on? So finding a companion in writing is something. This is another quote from Highland, which I thought was absolutely consoling for a lot of us. Most papers eventually find a home in a journal somewhere. Peer review is a mechanism for deciding whether a paper is published rather than whether it is published. So this is telling you the importance of peer review. Consider the peer, like most of the journals will have a peer reviewing criteria. So you can go check the peer review guidelines and see whether your paper adheres to the peer reviewing guidelines. Okay, once you get the paper peer reviewed, okay, there's always an ego hurt over there. Instead of getting that, try to incorporate the reviewer's suggestion as much as possible into your paper. Now, if you get angry with the peer review and you send it to another journal saying that I've written a very good paper and I don't think so, I need a peer review. If you do that, maybe it's again going to the same expert that was doing the peer review in this particular journal. So there might be a possibility, like, I don't think so, there might be possibilities where you get a paper published with no review. Most of the papers get accepted with minor revision or major revision, and mostly for us it would be a major revision. Okay, so if you're willing to go through the peer reviewing process, I think your paper would just turn out to be great, and I've found a lot of papers doing the same thing. Okay. Yeah, the next slide. Okay. So there are places where I have done actually 9 times I've done a review of one particular paper before it has come out. Right? So generally what editors are looking for is the novelty in the article, whether it's suitable to an international audience. So if you're sending a paper to an international audience, the first thing that would come to an editor's mind, whether it is suitable to an international audience. Okay. And clarity and brevity is something that all papers are looking for. Can we move on to the next slide? The next stage, like you've written your paper, you've got it published. Okay, by now it's promoting your work. Like, how can you promote your work? So you have to share your research work at conferences with colleagues through personal blogs and websites. You can also promote through social networking sites like Facebook, LinkedIn and Twitter, ResearchGate. And I've not done it through Facebook, LinkedIn and Twitter, but I've done it through ResearchGate and Academia. So next slide, please. This is again something that I found. This tagline, a maxim, is quite famous all over. It's publish or perish. I think we should move on to publish and flourish because the earlier thing, I think, is quite negative. This was said by Go in one of her papers. Okay. So let's publish and let's flourish. The references that I'm talking about is TESOL Quarterly. Like if you're looking for publishing in the field of ELT and language, TESOL Quarterly has in their website has given the research guidelines, which are very useful. Even Purdue University has given guidelines for writing in literature and in social science. Okay. So if you have any, these are the 2 papers that are Renandia's 2 papers that I was talking about. Like that would be really helpful if you want to. So if you have any questions, you can ask me. That we are running out of time, I think.
Yes, we received a few questions, Dr. Divya.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Divya, for the brain-filling ideas. and suggestions in a phased manner. And my compliments and thanks to you for leading a fresh researcher through a step-by-step process. And this is something which I believe is quite relevant to the today's theme and substance of our STPP. Dr. Divya, I particularly appreciate the time you have devoted to present your ideas in a very orderly, systematic, methodical, and well-structured manner. I hope we all enjoyed this brilliant presentation. And now, Dr. Divya, this is the time to answer some questions that have been posted in the chat box during the presentation. So the first question I am taking from Dharini T, and she's asking, what are the areas that the researchers are likely to get rejection of their paper? I think she's asking certain don'ts. Am I audible?
Yeah, yes, sir. So what I seriously think is, like, if your research is not strong enough, like if it doesn't have a strong literature review, I think that would be one area in which you would be getting a reject. Another area where you would be getting a reject is when your methodology is not strong enough. Like if there are flaws in your methodology, that's another area. Again, when you're sending it, as I have already said, like if you're sending it to a publication, for example, if you're sending it to a research, if your paper is a practical oriented paper and you're sending it to a research-based paper, research-based publication, then I'm sure you're going to get a rejection at that particular way. So, and also there are journals that have there are also journals that have 90% rejection rate, and there are journals that, so that's only a 10% acceptance rate. So out of 10 papers that they get, they only publish one paper. So getting a rejection is something that as young scholars, all of you should be used to it. Thank you.
Arpita Pal wants to ask, please tell about guest and ghost author once again.
Yeah, so this is rampant in the science field, as I said. Okay, a guest author is when a company, when an outside organization has done that particular research, they would write to establish authors in that particular field and ask them to actually guest author their particular paper. So that's guest authoring that paper. They are not involved in it's a practice that has to be guest authoring a particular paper that they have not done the research over there. That's guest authoring. And ghost authoring is again, there are things called scribes available, where the scribe actually writes the paper. The research is done by a group of scientists, and they get a person to actually write that particular paper. Okay. So that's a ghost author paper.
Okay. Shiva Subramanian is asking, when we don't get the data as happens to our expected results in ELT, what should we do?
I think you should report it openly. Like, I know there are a lot of pre-test and post-test that we do, and there are cases in which maybe after the post-test, the students' performance would go down. So whatever data that you get, don't manipulate your data. You have to report honestly. Right? That's what I believe in.
Dr. F. Julian is asking, please mention 2 or 3 journals that are free of cost and standard.
In the field of ELT, if you go to the Web of Science website, you just have to type language and linguistics, or if you just go to the search area, you'll get a list of 900 journals. So why are you looking for 1 or 2 journals? Like ELTJ is a very good journal in the field of if you're looking for TESOL Quarterly is another journal. You have studies in second language acquisition, second language research. You have so many associations of ITEFL. Each association has their journal, a journal of their own. Okay. So there are plenty of journals. It's not the want of journals. There are plenty of journals available. You're choosing the one that is suitable to your paper. So you have in Web of Science, in language and linguistics, you have almost 935 journals. In Scopus, you have 834 journals in language and linguistics.
Okay, Dr. Divya, I'm taking the last question.
Okay.
Would novel analysis, this is MS Siddharth Prabhu, would
Okay.
novel analysis papers by PhD literature scholars fulfill the partial requirements for awarding of degree, or would they be expected to submit only theoretical papers?
I think that the university, the people in charge should answer, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So,
I
Dr.
think
Divya,
it's
looks
all
like...
for the university, right?
Yes, yes. So it looks like we answered all your questions. And is there anything else you would like to mention? Please just come out. Okay, thanks, Dr. Divya, for a profound and insightful answer to the question. Thank you very much. Have a good night.